Hi, everybody. Can you hear me all the way in the back? Great. Such a delight to be here with you today in an audience devoted to thinking differently and thinking magically. I had the chance to be with a similar audience recently. It was a salon, and it was a salon for women of two generations, the older generation and the younger generation. And the idea was for the older generation to impart its wisdom to the younger. And so I was asked to share my regrets in life. What would I do differently if I had to do it all over again? And I thought about this for a while, and I realized that my first regret is that I'm now officially a member of the older generation. But, my real regret is that I'm an introvert, and as an introvert, it took me way too long to realize my own natural powers and to start to draw on my own natural strengths. And instead, I was spending way too much time trying to act like an extrovert instead of being who I was. And I believe that this is a mistake that many introverts make. But it's also a mistake that we all make, in a sense. A third to a half of the population is introverted. That is 1 out of every 2 or 3 people you know, quite possibly the person sitting next to you right now, or maybe you yourselves. And we are failing to make the most of these people's hearts and minds. And that is what I want to talk to you about today. But before we do that, I want to ask you to think about who you are. Are you an introvert or are you an extrovert? And so to get at this, we're going to do this in a kind of unorthodox style. I'm going to ask you briefly to break up into groups of 4 and to discuss with your group a memory from your childhood that you think illustrates the real you. And then we're going to ask each group to select the most personal and private and poignant of these memories and share them with the audience at large. And from this process, a greater truth will emerge. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. We are not really going to do that. We're not really going to do that. But I want you to think about how you were feeling during the brief moments where you were thinking, my God, I think she's serious. Extroverts in the room, you might have been feeling like, this is great. I get the chance to chat with my colleagues instead of sitting and listening passively to a speech. Introverts in the room, you might have been feeling like, how can I get out of here right now without insulting the speaker? This is how many introverts feel when they are presented with these kinds of group exercises, which is not to say, by the way, that introverts don't like to work collaboratively. In fact, we know from management research that introverts are disproportionately cooperative. But it is to say that they don't tend to like these kinds of spontaneous groupings for their own sake. They prefer to work on the kind of teamwork where everybody goes off and works on their own discrete piece of the puzzle, and then you come back and you share what you know. But another way to think about are you an introvert or an extrovert is to imagine that you've been at a party and you've been there for about 2 hours, let's say, and you're having a really good time and you're talking to people you really enjoy. Extroverts among you, you probably feel charged up by this. Your batteries are recharged, and so at the end of those 2 hours, you probably want to go to another party, or you want to stay all night at the one you're already at. Whereas introverts, by the end of that 2 hours, tend to wish to dear God that they were home in their pajamas, because introverts recharge their batteries by being alone or by being in a quieter environment. So having said this, let me just ask you really quickly for a show of hands, how many of you would say that you're introverts? Raise your hands. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's quite a number of you. I'm going to say that was 60%, but let's see. Let's do it the other way with extroverts. How many of you are extroverts? Okay, so maybe it's about 50-50 in this audience. Okay, good. But what's really important is not so much who we are, but why are we the way we are, and what does it mean for the way we organize society? And what you need to understand is that the difference between introverts and extroverts, it has to do with stimulation. It has to do with how do you respond to stimulation. Because introverts feel at their most alive, and they're most energetic, and they're most switched on and capable when they are in environments where there's less stuff coming at them. It's less stimulating. There's less social stuff to do. It's quieter. Extroverts are exactly the opposite. Extroverts crave more stimulation, and if they don't get it, they start to feel bored and uncomfortable. There was this really important study by the psychologist Russell Cain who gave introverts and extroverts math problems to solve. he gave them math problems to solve with varying levels of background noise. And what he found was that the introverts did best when the noise was lower, and the extroverts did best when the noise was higher. And I want to suggest to you that this is a profound flourish, because what it is telling us is there is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all environment. There's no such thing. What we need are schools and workplaces and so on, where people can choose the amount of stimulation that's coming at them at any given time so that they're feeling at their most alive. And yet, our society is not set up this way at all. It's really set up in a way that is designed for maximum stimulation. And one key example of this are open plan offices, which have become so prevalent, where you're sitting out in an office all day with people kind of looking at you all day long and listening to other people's noise. And why is this such a problem? Why should you care about this? Why should we all care about it? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but the one that I want to talk to you about today is creativity. It's creativity. Did you know that when psychologists look at who have been the most creative people over time across a broad variety of fields, they almost always find people with serious streaks of introversion in them? Now, these people are usually extroverted enough that they can go out and exchange ideas and advance ideas, because that's also an important piece of the creative puzzle. But all of these people are really comfortable with solitude, and solitude turns out to be a crucial ingredient of creativity, even though we have tend to lose sight of that nowadays. So this is Philippe Starck, a picture of Philippe Starck, one of the great innovative designers of our time. I know many of you are familiar with him, and he basically describes his creative process as a grand exercise in solitude. He says that he goes off every summer between June and September, and he kind of locks himself away. He says, I am all alone. I don't speak to anybody. I don't read magazines. I don't watch TV. I don't go to any cocktail parties. I don't do anything because I don't want to have other people's ideas coming at me. I want to be thinking about my own ideas. And, this is something that artists like Philippe Starck understand instinctively, but recently, psychologists are starting to understand just why it is that solitude is so precious and why we need to be reclaiming more of it for all of us, for the introverts for sure, but for the extroverts too. There's a ton of this interesting psychological research, and I go into it in great depth in my book, Quiet, but I'm just going to give you the briefest taste of it today so you'll see what I'm talking about. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is conformity. It is the fact that when we're in a group of people, when we are with other people, we tend to conform to group opinion. And even those of us who think of ourselves as kind of bold thinkers and mavericks and iconoclasts, all of us are kind of mind-bogglingly, horrifyingly subject to the pressures of conformity. And this is why we have to go off by ourselves sometimes to figure out what we really think. So I want to give you a taste of just how deep this drive to conform is. And I'm going to take you through research that started in the 1950s, and I'll tell you where it is today. But first, I'd like to play this video clip for you. And this is a clip of research done by the psychologist Saul Asch. It's one of the most robust findings in social psychology. It'll give you a sense of the drive to conform. So if we can just play that video.
The Asch Experiment is one of psychology's oldest and most popular pieces of research. A volunteer is told that he's taking part in a visual perception test. What he doesn't know is that the other participants are actors, and he's the only person taking part in the real test, which is actually about group conformity.
Please begin. The experiment you will be taking part in today involves the perception of line length. Your task will be simply to look at the line here on the left and indicate which of the 3 lines on the right is equal to it in length. So, for example, if you
The actors have been told to match the wrong lines. The volunteer will be monitored to see if he gives the correct answer or if he goes along with the opinion of the group and gives the wrong answer. In the first test, the correct answer is 2.
1. 1. 1. 2.
1. Once again, the correct answer is 2.
3. 3. 3. 3.
3.
Yeah, you know, I've seen this so many times and I still can't quite get over it. But I want to ask you a question about what you've just seen. Solomon Asch, the psychologist who designed this experiment and many others just like it, all coming up with these kinds of findings, he went to his grave asking this question. When the guy says that the answer is 3 instead of 2, does he do this knowing, does he understand that the answer is really 2, but he's pretending that it's 3 so that the group thinks highly of him? Or has he honest to goodness come to believe that the answer is 3? So let's take a little poll. How many of you think that he knows full well what the right answer is, but he just wants to go along with the group? Okay, most of you. And how many of you think that he has honest to goodness been convinced that the correct answer is 3? A handful of you. Okay, well, I'll tell you, the brave handful actually seems to be correct according to what we now know from the most recent research, because the cool thing is nowadays we can do variations of the Asch experiments, but we can put the subject's head inside a brain scanner at the very moment that they're saying 3 instead of 2, and we can kind of track what's going on inside their minds. And so I'm going to give you a sense of what these experiments look like. But before I tell you about this one, I'm just going to give you a brief disclaimer. This is a fascinating, brilliant experiment, but it is going to strike the ladies in the audience perhaps as a little bit sexist. And for the guys in the audience, it might make you seem a little bit dopey. So just bear with me on that in the interest of science. It's really interesting. Okay, the way it worked was they took a bunch of guys and they showed them photographs of faces like the one that you see right here. And they asked them, and each guy was shown many, many of these faces, and for each one they had to rate the woman's attractiveness on a scale of 1 to 7. So in this case, the guy has rated her a 4. But a few seconds after he gets to rate her, he then gets to see how his peer group has rated the same woman. In this case, they've rated her a 6, so a lot higher than he's rated her himself. And so he sees this, he goes on, he looks at the other women. An hour later, he gets the chance to rate these same exact women all over again. And sure enough, according to what the Asch experiments predict, sure enough, he's now more likely to rate this same woman a 5 or a 6. But remember, his head's inside a brain scanner the whole time. And so what we know is that at the very moment he's looking at this woman, the reward networks in his brain, which are the parts of the brain that get excited at the prospect of something appealing and attractive, his reward networks are now more activated than they were before, before his peer group had told him that this woman was attractive. And this is an amazing result when you think about it, because what it tells us is that even about something as seemingly personal and as seemingly visceral as who we're attracted to, we are influenced by the opinions of those around us. We mimic other people's opinions. And so if we want to know what we truly think, and if we want to be capable of deep and original thought and of deep convictions, we need to spend some time going off by ourselves to figure it out. And so in closing, what I want to say to you, this is a conference dedicated to thinking differently. So I'm going to end with 3 calls of ways to think differently. And the first one is to think differently about solitude. To say that solitude matters. It matters more than we think, for all of us. But for some people, solitude is the air that they breathe, and let us let them breathe it. The second one is to rethink leadership. We tend in Western culture to assume that the best talkers, the most assertive talkers, are the ones who should be the leaders. But in fact, there is no correlation between having the best ideas and being the best talker. And so we need to think differently about who our leaders are. And we actually know from recent research out of the Wharton School, that introverted leaders often deliver better outcomes than extroverts do. And you will see this if you look around you. You will see models of introverted leaders all over the place. This is Larry Page and Marissa Mayer in Silicon Valley. And here we have, some of the most transformative leaders of the 20th century. Eleanor Roosevelt, Gandhi, Rosa Parks. All these people were described as quiet, as shy, as soft-spoken, and all of them took the helm even though every bone in their bodies was telling them not to. And there turns out to be a curious power about this, because people could feel that these people, that these leaders were at the helm not because they enjoyed being looked at, but because they had something to say and they had no choice but to say it, and so people followed them. And then finally, I'd like to say my final call for thinking differently is to think differently about diversity. You know, when we look at diversity, we tend to think about racial diversity and gender diversity. And we know that these are moral issues, but we know that these are business issues too, that they affect the bottom line. The same exact thing is true when it comes to personality diversity. We desperately need the talents of the quiet thinkers among us. And the beauty of it is that it doesn't take a lot of time to effect this change, and it doesn't cost a lot of money. All it takes is thinking a little bit differently about what it means to be quiet. Thank you very much.
Oh.
Thank you.
I want to make a question. Is that possible? Oh, yeah, sure. Susan, are you born or you become introvert?
Oh, such a good question. Is it nature or nurture? So, you know, as with all personality traits, it's a mix of both. But in fact, introversion, extroversion is one of the most genetically heritable traits. And you can see it even with the youngest babies. Like from the minute babies are born, you can give them sugar water to drink. And the babies who are more likely to be introverts will suck more vigorously on the sugar water because they're more reactive to stimulation than the extroverts are. Yeah.
Una pregunta para el público. Levante la mano quien cree que ella es introvertida, por favor. ¿Quién cree? Who believes that she's an extroverted person?
No.
¿Cómo cambiaste? How did you learn to become or how did you change? Do you feel that you talk as an extrovert person, or I'm wrong?
Oh gosh, no. No, I'm very much an introvert. And first of all, I would say that there are introverts out there all over the place who seem like extroverts, but they're really not. And second, I would say, you know, for me, I used to be absolutely terrified of public speaking. And before my book came out...
We were aware of that.
Oh, did you talk?
I'm just
oh,
kidding.
Yeah, okay. No, so before my book came out, I actually practiced speaking for a year.
Okay.
I called it my year of speaking dangerously.
Great. Un aplauso.
Yeah, so.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. Gracias.